student that participated in the Washington University's prison education program. During my 25 and a half years, reflection was a daily process. Upon my reflection, my youth became the forefront of my thoughts, giving me the desire to reach out to the youth growing up in my community. My reflections and the prison education program has led me to a greater motivation to start my own youth education plus recreation center. With all of that being said, I'm honored and grateful to be given this opportunity to join this platform and to introduce Ms. Kyes Stevens. With over 20 years of experience in prison arts and education innovation and administration, Kyes Stevens is a national leader in the field. Stevens is founding director of the Alabama Prison Arts Plus Education Program, one of the most esteemed and longest running arts and education program in the country, offering equal access to sustained and quality educational experiences to those incarcerated in state prisons. She received the Auburn University Young Alumni Achievement Award in 2012 and an Auburn University Women of Distinction Award in 2010. In 2016, she was acknowledged as both Southern Living Southerner of the Year and one of AL.com's Women Who Shaped the State. In May 2019, Stephen was awarded the Alabama State Council on the Arts Governor's Award for a life of investing in the arts for the state of Alabama, and was invited to give the commencement speech at her alma mater, Sarah Lawrence College, in 2018. Stevens was part of the formative committee for the Alliance for Higher Education and began the organization of the Southern Collective for Higher Education in Prison. She was on the strategic planning team that built the National Justice Arts Coalition, effectively becoming the only person in the country to work to establish both national organizations. In 2016, she was invited to the White House as advisor for strategic planning for higher education and criminal justice reform by President Barack Obama for a total of 3 trips, and was appointed to the U.S. Attorney of the Northern District of Alabama's Reentry Council. She facilitated Auburn University as a founding signatory of the Fair Chance Education Pledge, and was the lead for Auburn's participation in the first round of the U.S. Department of Education's Second Pell Experimental Sites Initiative. Stephen works closely with Alabama Department of Corrections, and the partnership between APAEP and the ADLC is regarded as a model for the rest of the country. She continues to work with peers from around the country to develop strategies for arts and higher education and prison programs, and serves as a consultant and advisor to institutions of higher education. As a poet, Stephen has completed numerous residencies published in myriad journals and have several photography exhibits. She still teaches annual courses inside the facilities. In addition to lifelong services to the state of Alabama through building access to art and education for all, Stevens is deeply invested in her lifelong home of rural Alabama. She serves as a town council member in Waverly, Alabama, as well as worked for a volunteer fire department for 10 years.
Wow, that's a lot, huh? That's a really kind introduction, Travis. I really appreciate that, and it's interesting listening to that as a way of stepping in to this talk and thinking about process and design and steps along the way where decisions were made. So we'll dig into some of that. But I'd really first like to start by saying thanks to Bruce Lindsay for the invitation to speak with y'all today. I met Bruce, we will not say how many years ago, when he and Marilee were in Auburn, and I'm very grateful that our paths overlapped, and it really started a wonderful friendship and very intense conversations about place and the role of the university in place. And most certainly those conversations have played out in ways with this program. So it's great to see you, Bruce and Marilee. Also wanted to say thanks to Kareem Martin and to Travis Ross for being here today and participating in this conversation. One of the things, and I'm just a fairly direct person, so I'm just going to continue with that. One of the things our field has not done well in the past is centering the lives and experiences of system impacted people in the conversation. And so I am grateful for y'all being here, and I am looking forward to you chiming in at every possibility. So my plan for today is to ramble a little bit, and I am definitely a rambler. I can spend hours working on putting together a talk, and then I can't stay on script to save my life. So I have some ideas that I hope we can get through, and if not, maybe we can circle back to those at another time. But the way I think about interactions like this is that, like, we're here. I mean, yes, it's Zoom, but it's still a community. And community means that it is a multiple point conversation and points of view. It can't ever be about a single voice. So I'm going to talk for a little bit, and then I hope we can all just kind of dig into a meaningful conversation about the infinite complexities of this work. Um, when I first talked with Bruce about the Divided City project and this particular engagement for speaking, my mind kind of went haywire because he situated a lot of this in terms of structures of segregation, rooting in Ferguson, and of course, me being a lifelong resident, pretty much, of the state of Alabama. Segregation and racial violence and racial injustice has some pretty significant roots here, and I would argue that the roots are not gone. And so, in thinking about that, and coming back and ponderings and thinking about the work of arts and education in prisons and thinking about structures, even in our greater society, I'm always coming back to how people want quantifiable justifications for work, and for any work, really. And it's this idea of being hinged upon having to demonstrate that you need to prove that something or someone or many someones are worth it. Segregation is based in a valuation of work. All the isms that we fabricate create structures to define and exclude. And so before we get into more of this, I actually want you to just sit for a second and think about how you as an individual determine worth. Where does that measurement come from? The values, your vision, probably highly influenced by land, scope of academia, race, class, identity, family. But these measurements, we create them, and in this creating process, intended or not, we are inherently making a system that always pushes someone to the side. We are always saying that somebody cannot be included in this group or in this discussion or in this art exhibit or in this institution of higher education. And ultimately, it comes down to me, these questions of, whose life is worth it. And that so much of how we define worth is ultimately hinged upon economic valuation, really points to the monumental task that we face in terms of trying to build something different. In our field of arts and education and prisons, a lot of people, and this has started to shift, but they hinge the value of their program on impacting rates of recidivism, on the money that it will save a state. It is, programs are based on the language of making the state safer. It absolutely has nothing to do with the individual who wants to make art, the individual who wants to study something. It's about an economic impact. So we align our education systems with this remarkably misunderstood term, recidivism, which is incredibly manipulatable, rather than focusing on the language of art and education as a human right. learning because, art because, investment and support because. So many individuals don't want that to be the impetus because of a silent or even sometimes not silent belief that those in prison do not deserve those rights, that they have given up those rights by nature of a conviction. I've had direct messaging from public officials and administrators in the state of Alabama who have said, you cannot justify the program by the inherent value of learning and creating. That won't work here. It won't work here because we as a society do not value art and education and equity for all people. There are a couple of really powerful frameworks for considering how I entered into building this program here in Alabama. One, I'm from here, and that makes a big difference. Okay, Alabama is we do not necessarily like outsiders. We definitely don't want outsiders coming into certain communities and telling us what to do and how to do it. So being of this place, sounding like people that are from this place, having a truck like other people from this place, right? I mean, all of these things contribute to how the DOC perceived me. My work as a volunteer firefighter and an EMT profoundly influenced how I step into this work. And I've said this before in talks, but just as a point of reference here, much of what we did was responding to vehicle accidents, and some of them fairly intense. There was never a point where we are responding to the scene of an accident, of a crisis, where people in the volunteer fire department or the paramedics or anybody said, oh, we are not going to help this person because they were driving too fast. Or we are not going to help this person because there is a line of beer cans behind the car. That never came to play. So in the moment, there is a crisis and a human being needs assistance. And what I learned from that is all the places where we decide worth in terms of investing in a crisis, especially in terms of people. And I would argue that the majority of human beings have been in crisis multiple times in their lives. We have different resources for being able to deal with those crises. Also really important to how I have structured this work, and this has to do with being of this place, is I am a farmer and a gardener. And that means I spend a lot of time pragmatically fixing things. You got a problem with your fence, you fix it. You don't have the parts, you figure out another way, right? It's just the figure it out for yourself mentality. And knowing that there might be a better way to do something if you had an endless amount of money or resources, but if you don't, you figure it out. And another really important and final important context for this is that I went to Sarah Lawrence College for graduate school. And Sarah Lawrence College, I never knew my grades while I was there. In fact, I never knew my grades from 2 master's degrees until after a year I graduated, because they don't give them to you. And they don't give them to you because the fundamental process and engagement with Sarah Lawrence is about learning. It is not about a fairly arbitrary number that can be assigned to something, right? That measures, again, we're back to this measuring. Of course, they give you grades, right? They have to, because people are going on to other careers, but they just don't give it to you because they don't want your interaction with learning to be hinged upon an A or a B or a C or whatever. And what that does is it takes off pressure. It puts on a different kind of pressure. But it takes off the pressure of performance and measures that we are I think very traditionally controlled and even restrained by. You are much more willing to take a risk as a learner and a thinker and an artist when nobody is going to give you a grade when you turn in an assignment. They're going to give you feedback. They're going to engage. They're going to ask a lot of questions. And so learning is about process, right? It's not necessarily about the end result. It is about process. So fundamental to building the Alabama Prison Arts and Education Project was visioning a path to quality arts and education opportunities in prisons that was centered on the inherent beauty of learning and making, to make a space open for all people to be and become, and to build a community with intention. I literally wanted to put into action what a program would look like that answered poet Margaret Walker's call for a world that would hold all the people. For me, the very beginning of this work was teaching at the Talladega Federal Prison in Alabama. What made me want to build the program was the students, and very selfishly, how remarkable the experience was for me as a teacher and a poet. I wanted to keep teaching there. People wrote poetry because it was a means of survival. The urgency for knowing was not based on accolades or publication, but in the fundamental human desire to create and communicate. The community space of those classes was beautiful because the inhibitions that we see in most classrooms where students are reticent to ask questions and expose some kind of unknowing were not there. The desire to know was infinitely more than what should be known. And as a teacher and poet, the experience called into question for me so much of what I had been taught about what is a good poem. And here we are back to this measurement system that we are so entrenched in. So in the fall of 2001, I started teaching at Talladega, and I knew that I wanted to keep going. In the spring of 2002, I began teaching poetry at the Julia Tutwiler State Prison for Women. At this point, there was not a program, there was me, but there was an incredibly powerful seed. And I was going to say something snarky, but I just remembered that we're recording it, so I censored myself. So those first couple of semesters of classes, one of the things that I really want everybody to understand is that, yes, I built the program. I started the program. The students are the ones that made the map. The students are the ones who taught me how to do. They taught me how to navigate the DOC system. They taught me how to structure classes. They taught me about what people needed for supplemental educational resources. I mean, everything. I did not know that, right? So the expertise did not fall with me. I would argue that it still does not fall with me. And what I learned inside of the prisons, I mean, we could talk for a very long time about the things that I've learned inside of the prisons, but very early on, my biggest surprise was not our students. Why wouldn't human beings want to write? Why wouldn't human beings want to make art, right? That's not a surprise. What surprised me was that my biggest allies in trying to help me get the program started were people inside of the Department of Corrections. That was shocking to me. And for the most of the history of our program, that has still been the case. What I found inside of prisons when I first started teaching were people that were not unlike who I grew up around. We are fed all these media images, right? And as a privileged ass white person, yes, I just cussed. Sorry, I was trying not to do that. From Alabama, right? I get to have a different existence in being here. But growing up in rural Alabama, I was around lots of folks, the beloved community that I returned to, right? And so I saw the people that I knew. And what I also saw with absolute clarity was that the people in the state of Alabama who were incarcerated because of poverty. And what poverty means here is that there is no opportunity. Sometimes there are some fairly heated discussions about what that means. They're like, oh, anybody can go to the Auburn University Library, or anybody can go to the museum, or anybody. Well, actually, no, you can't. If you can't get there, if you are taking care of a sibling, if you are working, if you are doing X, Y, and Z, and the different, that isn't accessibility. And so a lot of things that are constructed in our society are accessible to the middle class and upper class idea of what is accessibility. Another thing that struck me about our first day of classes, and we have offered many, is the number of students we will always ask on introductions. We always ask people, why are you here? And we're not asking, why are you here inside of the facility? That is not pertinent to anything. But why are you here in the class? And there's always a range of answers, but there are always multiple people in every single class without fail that say, I always wanted to learn how to do blah. I always wanted to learn how to write poems. I always wanted to learn how to draw. I always wanted to take a foreign language class, right? And there was never the opportunity. And so I still don't get over the shock and the inherent wrongness of someone in the state of Alabama having to be inside of a prison to access these things for the first time in their life. I'm going to skip this little section here because it's maybe not the most useful, but I do want to circle back a little bit to this idea of Alabama and histories of racial oppression here, and how that still manifests itself. You know, land, one could argue, has memory, just like, and it can be passed along, just like trauma and memory moves through people. And so when you think about that in relationship to the physical land of the state of Alabama, not only did I'm 40 miles from Horseshoe Bend, and we massacre Native people and drive them out of their land. We also have, a system of slavery and human oppression and trauma that is still feeding us, right? Is still feeding our structures and our thought processes because we don't deal with the past here. We ignore the past, or we find snippets of places to deal with the past. But one of the things in terms of thinking about the long-lasting impacts of slavery and sharecropping and the convict labor system that was so prevalent here in the state, if you take some kind of translucent material that you can print on, and you print out a bunch of maps of the state of Alabama, and each piece represents a food desert, or poverty rates, or school performance, or access to health care, access to mental health care, access to meaningful employment, access to sanitation and sewage and clean water, where there is internet, where there isn't, libraries, museums, after school programs, all of these different things. You lay all those maps on top of each other, and all of those places converge, and those are the locations of the highest incarceration rates in the state of Alabama. And of course they are, because we don't invest in our communities with equity. So if you grow up in one of those locations where there are no resources, um, there are no after school programs. I mean, it's interesting anecdote. I was in a statewide meeting on arts and education, and there are entire counties in the state of Alabama that don't have an arts program in the county. And there's tons that just have one or two, and those are the high school marching bands. So if you grow up as a person who is inclined toward the visual arts, the musical arts, what do you do? Where do you go? Now, some narky people say, oh, just get on the internet. Guess what? Those are the places that do not have affordable broadband. So they can't. So you're basically saying, by the structured nature of the state, that the individuals who live in that geographic location do not matter. That your dreams do not matter. Your imagination does not matter. Your contribution to what you can become and be for the state and for our society as a whole does not matter. How in the world do you undo this? How does a person decide to build a different life when there are no opportunities? And how the hell do you do that in prison? Our answer here was poetry and art. And the reason that I'm focusing for poetry and art is because they have been the most powerful tool for stepping into learning. I cannot tell Bruce, sorry, Bruce, I'm going to call you out here. Okay. I can't tell Bruce that a poem that he wrote is wrong. If he was trying to write a perfect sestina, I might be able to say, okay, this is not a perfectly measured sestina, but your poem isn't wrong. It's the same experience with stepping into drawing. A drawing may not be exactly what you wanted it to be, but it's not wrong because it's the process, right? By and large, most of our 5,000 students who have run through our program at this point have never been in a space where the idea of process and engaging with anything, learning, creating is beautiful, right? That failure is absolutely necessary. You must write the disastrous poem. You must make the drawing that looks absolutely nothing like your hand, even though it was supposed to be your hand. Because if you don't do that, then you're never going to get to the point of making something that does look like your hand. So essential with the idea of process with our program is also that everyone is welcome. Our program started as an outreach program offering non-credit classes. And I think one of the things that's important to know about context here is that when I first started researching building this program, I did think about credit classes. It wasn't the first thing that I wanted to do. But there is a statute in the state of Alabama that says an individual who is incarcerated cannot earn academic credit. Again, we're back to this determining worth, right? All the systems that do this. So I'll get to the undoing of that statute in a little while. But one of the things that I wanted to say about making the open door policy and letting everybody in is that it's definitely more work on an instructor. And it absolutely makes the community of your classroom stronger. And you have some really miraculous moments that come from it. We had a gentleman, we were at a medium security men's facility class, or it was a world literature class. And it was the first day. all of the students had come in. We were meeting in the chapel. There are not a lot of educational classrooms in the Alabama Department of Corrections. And about 20 minutes in, an older gentleman walks in, and he's standing at the back of the pews, and he's standing there for a while. And so finally I said, are you in class? Do you want to come join us? And he didn't say anything. And, I'm wondering a little bit what's going on. And then, finally he said, yeah, I want to be in the class. I said, great, come on up. And he just stands there. And I said, and then he says, there's just one thing. I don't read and write so good. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. Come on. I'm motioning him up, and he still doesn't move. And then he says, I actually can't read and write at all. And so I turned and I looked at the instructor and I said, okay, this is going to be a ton of work, but I really think that we should allow this guy to be in the class. Every single week, they're reading novels in this class. Every single week, a different student in the class, and they figured this out amongst themselves, read the novel out loud to this guy and wrote his reading response. He said it, they wrote it down. And on the last week of class, here they're coming in and handing in their final essays. And this guy wrote his first 3 sentences. Every single letter was compressed. There was no punctuation, but he wrote it. And he said, I guess if I can complete a world literature class from Auburn University, then I can go to ABE, which is Adult Basic Ed. Yes. All the other systems don't want to let that individual in because he's not ready, he's not prepared, he can't do the material yet. How in the world do you get prepared if you don't have the opportunity? You can't just get any learning resources that you want inside of a prison. And so, yes, I am, thrilled beyond measure that he took that as his opportunity to go on and get his ABE. And if we have time at the end, I'll tell you another story. Actually, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you the story. The stories are really important. So we were at another men's facility, Bibb County Correctional, which is up near Tuscaloosa, in between Tuscaloosa and Birmingham. And again, first day of class. And we've moved through the program introduction and all the nuts and bolts and stuff. And a graduate student from the University of Alabama was teaching with us. And he went through the syllabus, and then he asked all the guys in the class to pull out a piece of paper and to get a pen and to write down a list of words. And the first one was a word that, it's like a word that you liked, a word that you didn't like, a word that you liked the sound of, a word that you thought you should know, but you didn't know. There was one other on the list. And then the last one on the list was a word you think is beautiful. And we are sitting in a completely dilapidated trailer on the yard at Bibb County Correctional. And like 3 or 4 minutes into this older gentleman in the back of the room slowly raises his hand, and Christopher calls on him. And he just says in this incredibly slow and methodical voice, he said, I never knew a word could be beautiful. And like, these are the moments, right, when you are inside of a classroom, and what the community education and the non-credit classes inside of prisons, that those are the spaces that must exist. Those are the opportunities that have to be there. The majority of people who are incarcerated in the state of Alabama are not prepared to step into a college degree program. The majority of the people who are incarcerated in the state of Alabama don't have a GED. So if for us, right, in doing the non-credit program, we thought that we were doing what the only thing that we could do, but what we were doing actually was building the structure that would become our pathway program to a college degree, so that somebody starts with an art class or a poetry class and then they move, right? And it's still non-credit classes, but again, you're moving along this path and you're building community and you're learning who your allies and your fellow nerds are on the inside. And that community and that investment in each other, right, fuels people to keep going. um, it's interesting. I actually never wanted to build a credit program. Lots of people are really surprised about that. When we first started doing the higher education and prison conferences years ago, most of my beloved colleagues they spent all of their time touting the essential nature of the college degree. And I was always the wrench going into the very fast moving wheel, about that you cannot discount non credit classes. You cannot discount any experience of creativity and learning and engagement. Um, the reason we have a college credit program is because our students asked for it. The second reason we have a college degree program is because the last commissioner of the Alabama Department of Corrections called me one day on my cell phone, completely out of the blue. And I got to tell you, when a commissioner calls you on your cell phone out of the blue, you sweat, because the first thing that you think is going to come out is like, there's a problem. and I am somehow associated with that problem. But I answer the phone, and Kim Thomas says in this extremely enthusiastic voice, he says, "I found the loophole." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "The loophole in the statute." I said, "Okay." He said, in the early 90s, when this statute was created, there was no one conceived in a million years that a major public four-year institution in the state of Alabama would be doing any work inside of prisons. The statute was for the two-year colleges. But I just want to point out that the whole reason we have a credit program is because a commissioner was trying to find the loophole. He wanted that opportunity. And this is where everything having to do with prisons is so intensely complicated, because there is the system of the prison that is as unjust as you could possibly imagine. And then inside of that system are people, right? The people who reside inside of the facilities, the people who work at the facilities, the people who run the Alabama Department of Corrections. And very early on, and I think I'm going to chalk this up to being Southern, and I can be chatty, you talk with people. If you are waiting to do something, you talk with people. You don't just sit there looking at your phone. We didn't really have those back then. But, and so when I would go to the prisons to do my classes, I would get there early and I would talk to officers. I would situate myself outside of the warden's office at Tutwiler so that I was visible. And that visibility meant that when she had time, she would talk to me. In one of those conversations, I had asked permission to bring in a CD player. We're really dating the program here, right? Because I wanted to play some classical music. And she approved it, and then spent 20 minutes talking to me about how she wanted to pipe music over the intercom system for 30-minute increments throughout the day. And on the heels of that information was also the security reason for why they couldn't do that. And so when you're a problem solver, you see a situation like that and you're like, okay, where is the space where we can do something? Because here is a warden who is supporting an arts program on, I mean, this was the first time I was teaching in state prisons. And so long story short, we started a music performance series open to everybody, right? So we can't get the music on the intercom because it interferes with security. Okay, here's a hurdle. Let's find another way around it. Is it the same thing? No. But is it a workaround that makes it somewhat accessible rather than not accessible at all? Yes. And I think part of my philosophy with running and building the program has always been there are always going to be obstacles. You don't always know the answer. You can't always know the answer. Your job is to figure out through talking with lots of different people what's possible. And then when you know what's possible in terms of restrictions, you formulate plans, you send them to the facility, you have a conversation, and then all of a sudden people are excited. And the DOC actually feels invested in it because they've been a part of the conversation. I'm assuming the individuals on the Zoom here who work with the program there at WashU, y'all have had the same hurdles that we continue to have with getting into the prisons here in Alabama due to COVID. We started a newsletter project so they get a newsletter from us every week. It's actually now going into 26 states and 3 different countries, which is nice. But what our students kept writing to us was how desperate they were to see us. And we were desperate to see them. And we are in the middle of COVID, and COVID in the prisons is horrid. So we did a concert outside of the fence so that they could actually physically see us and we could physically see them. And the importance of that is like the music was great and it's important, but I think the humanness, right, the anchor of that was really essential for helping them sustain and keep an eye on the day to when we can get back, and honestly to help us sustain to keep an eye on when we can get back. I'm trying to keep track of our time here. I want to I'm actually just going to skip most of this. But one of the things I wanted to say is that I want to come back for 2 seconds to my hesitation for the college degree program, because I recognize that I'm talking to individuals who are at an institution of higher education. And part of my frustration and hesitancy was always rooted in the knowledge that most of the programs I saw did nothing but the college program, that there was nothing available for the 99.5% of the rest of the population. And I had students say, Kyes, I don't want a college degree. I just want to learn. And so as a major university that is also an outreach and engagement land grant institution, we are supposed to serve the people. And if we have this large swath of humans inside of a place that want to learn, but they don't want to do this one thing that we are offering, then we are excluding them. So the community education classes are the pathway. They are we are here. Let's learn, let's engage, let's build a community together. And if people from that experience want to get their GED, or they want to go on into our college program, or they want to get a welding certificate, they've got their path and they're in charge of it. But if we are just doing the one thing, I think we're missing a lot of people.
Guys, how did Auburn think about that?
Well, we started as a non-credit program, so that was our only option to us. So for us, it made sense. I think, if I'm being completely candid, if I had approached Auburn University in 2002 about building a college degree program for people inside, they would have laughed me off the planet. I also am going to acknowledge that I didn't ask anybody's permission to build the program. I was working to build the program as a nonprofit, and then it became a program at Auburn. And it kind of went through the back door, truth be told. And there are some great things that came from that. And there are also some not great things that came from that. But what we had in 2015, when the opening for Second Chance Pell came out, was a 16-year track record of offering classes, hundreds of classes. At this point, we've offered over 400 semester length classes to more than 5,000 folks in 11 different facilities across the state. We have a nationally traveling art exhibit. We publish a book of their work every 2 years. We've put in about 28,000 books into libraries across the state. And so we had the track record. And at that point, we had moved enough inside the realm of higher education for more administrators to see opportunity, and that universities should be doing this, right? That is part of our job as an institution of higher education. So I'm going to close really quick, and then we'll open this up, because it seems like it's a good time to get to some dialogue. I titled this, "What's Love Got to Do with It?" And I see some chuckles on some faces, which I appreciate. There is a disconnect between the language and justifications and valuation systems that are used in higher education and humanity. And I think there is a really important case to be made that it is completely okay for an institution of higher education to act through an idea of love and compassion for the people of a state or a community to help grow the state and the people and the community. That it literally can be the acknowledgement of, I value your life. And that the worth, right? All of these measures of worth that we use for who gets in and the criteria and all of these things, you can build something and then you can unbuild something, right? And that there is there's a case to be made for unbuilding and using a different context and framework for considering how we approach education for people who have a hard time getting to higher education, or even education in their communities prior to higher ed. So I don't think, a lot of folks think, oh, yeah, Kyes, pat, we hear you, you're, my philosophy, blah, blah, blah. Rage and love can exist in the same space. You can rage against a system and injustice and want to be a catalyst for moving communities and people forward. And you can also be very secure in saying, this is an act of love and compassion because I value the human beings that are on this planet with me. And that your life is essential to my life. And it doesn't matter that our lives are different. They must exist together, right? We're not creating clones. we're creating pathways for people to learn and explore and expand. So I'm going to end with one story and then I'll stop. So after 20 years of doing this, there are not a lot of firsts for me anymore. Just before Christmas this past year, I had a first. We had a student at Donaldson Correctional who was incarcerated for 37 years through a life without parole sentence, 3 strikes, you're out sentencing for non-violent convictions. And an extraordinary student, but also an extraordinary mentor to others, an incredible artist, gifted. He was resentenced to time served. And I drove to Birmingham and was able to hug him on the day that he was released from prison after 37 years. And the point of this is, one, it's just like the importance of that hug to say, I see you, I'm glad you're here. You guys, in less than 3 minutes, we were talking about art. And here is an individual who has stepped out of prison for the first time in 37 years, who did not ever think he was going to get out of prison alive. And he wanted to talk about art. And so it is essential. He wasn't eligible for our college program. He's never taken a credit class with us. But all the non-credit classes, all the community education classes that we took, he took with us. I mean, it allowed him to become and create and have a completely different experience with the world. And we're looking on how to get him enrolled in college now. So it's that's a good point to end on. I just want to say thank you so much for y'all's time. I do hope we've got enough time for some good follow-up questions and conversation here. So thanks, y'all.
Thank you. And thank you, Kyes, for that. That was amazing. I now want to kick off the Q&A discussion by starting with Kareem Martin. Kareem Martin is also an alumni of the Washington University Prison Education Project. So Kareem. I think you're muted. You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I said thank you. I got cut off for about, I don't know, about maybe 5 minutes or so because my battery died. I'm on my phone because I joined this meeting literally right off the airplane. And so yeah, so you said, I think, well, you said the program that you all, it's a non-credit program.
I'm having a little bit of trouble of hearing. Is it?
Let me turn my Bluetooth is synced with my car. I need to turn my phone speaker on because the Bluetooth it can't distort my sound. Let me see. I gotta figure out how to cut this off.
Kareem, it looks like.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello?
Yep.
Kareem, just talking to your phone, honey.
Can you hear me?
It's breaking up. So maybe we'll give you a second to get it together. So
Kareem, what might help is turning off your video. I know sometimes that helps with audio because your video is also freezing.
I know it might take longer, but also if you put something in the chat too, that might be easiest if there's issues.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yeah, that's it.
You can't hear me?
Yes.
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 I said you can't hear me now?
Yes.
Good. All right. So yeah, I said I got lost. I lost connection earlier for about 5 minutes because my battery died. I joined this meeting like fresh out right off the plane, so I had to use my cell phone to log in the car. But if I heard you correct, I believe you said that the program in Auburn is it still a non-credit program at this point?
No, it's credit and non-credit.
Hello?
Can he not hear?
Kareem, you're muted.
Oh.
There you go.
There you go.
All right. One of the questions that I want to ask you that I was thinking about as you were speaking, because it was something that I don't know, experienced in my time with the PEP program was the difference between, I want to say, the level of engagement in students there before and after, like the credit aspect of the program was implicated. What I mean is, earlier you said something about like you mentioned worth, okay? And I know from my understanding, like just in my experience, my understanding, my interpretation of worth is kind of, like you said, it's hinged upon, in many ways, be it right or wrong, like it is hinged upon the accomplishment of, I don't know, things being ideas or opinions or whatever. And that without exclusion, like relative to academia. In many ways, we qualify if we do or do not belong in a space based on what we're able to obtain or accomplish. And in most cases, that's kind of, determined on our GPA or our grade or in one level of accomplishment or another. And I remember at one time, I was not in the program during that time, but I was at the institution when the PEP program existed at a time where the ability to acquire credits was minimal, almost non-existent. And at that time, I was one of the individuals that questioned if I would be able to maintain a level of interest minus the occasional opportunity to acquire it's for my, time, for my work, for my effort. And I was just wondering, like, as like somebody that was emotionally, intellectually invested in trying to develop a program like that, at what point, or if any, did you recognize any, I don't know, I want to say drop off in effort as far as, the students there went as far as, the availability of credit minus the availability of credit goes, if that makes sense.
It does. And that's it's a good question. So one of the logistics about our credit program, and again, this kind of comes back to our fairly unusual relationship with the Department of Corrections. Our credit program is currently located at Staten Correctional, which is a medium security men's facility, kind of centrally located in the state. And there are several other facilities located on the same land. So I had asked in my initial proposal to the DOC if they would allow people at each of the facilities in close proximity to also apply for the college credit program and then transfer them should they choose to be transferred, so that folks were not excluded. And the person, one of the associate commissioners just looked at me and said no. And I was like, okay. She said, no, we're going to do it for the whole state. So any person in the state of Alabama who can move to a medium security facility, which we understand is an obstacle and a barrier, is eligible to get into the program. So because we work at multiple facilities, we haven't seen the drop off, but that's because we're not doing everything in one location. And our programmatic growth was hinged upon, there are literally no classrooms available in the Alabama Department of Corrections. So to offer more classes to more students, that meant expanding to another facility. Which when we were working with 4 or 5 facilities seemed very manageable. The semester that we started doing 11 facilities was kind of opening up an end of chaos that was not super sustainable. But so we haven't seen the drop off. But part of that is also related to, so a lot of culturally inside of the facilities in Alabama right now, there is such a deep level of hopelessness and distrust that is toward programming. So many individuals here who earn vocational certificates or complete rehabilitation programs or all of the dots in the boxes, they're still not getting paroled. Or when they are paroled, they are not able to find employment. And so there's a lot of things that we can address with that, but it's if there is a lack of participation, it's because people don't see the purpose of the education. It's not necessarily because we're offering credit or non-credit. If that's helpful.
I think Kareem has some more technical issues, but we can open up for discussion.
I had a question kind of going off of what Kareem was saying, because I do think that some of the students in Washington program, like why a liberal arts degree? And I love art, and I'm in the art history program, and I believe that everyone should love art. But I also know that I grew up in a kind of culture where the museums and spaces like that, why would you want to learn about art kinds of things? And I'm wondering what your sales pitch is for a student who's like, why should I spend my time on this thing that won't, maybe help me get to parole, that's not credit? Because I'm imagining it seems like that's something that you face.
Well, because we get applications from students around the state, there is not a lot of sales pitch. And because so many individuals inside have been at a facility where we have offered, the community education classes for so long, they are familiar with us and our program and the community and the dynamic that we try to set up in the classroom. So, one of the things when we built our degree, it actually isn't a liberal arts degree. It is and I'm a poet and also have a graduate degree in history. And, you know, it also isn't about me, but I understand your inclination to want, you know, people to be exposed to something. We built an interdisciplinary studies degree program because it was the track that would meet the needs of the most students who had the most diversity and interest. So we combine a business curriculum and a human development and family studies and leadership. So it's kind of tailor made and structured to meet all the needs that students have been talking to us about in terms of their individual goals for what they would like to do when they get out. So we're a big advocate of that model because we do have a lot of students who are less liberal arts leaning and are more business leaning. One of our credit students, every time I go into the facility, he walks up to me and says, "Have we figured out how to get more advanced math and engineering classes?" And I'm like, "Not yet." Right? But it's like you're working on the process of how do you make this available. So I hope that's helpful. But as part of any college degree, your core curriculum is a liberal arts experience. So it's a merge between the two.
Thank you.
Rob.
Hi, Kyes.
Hi, Rob.
Good to see you. Man, your whole discussion of the non-credit and the accessibility is so inspiring. And it's really something for us to think about. We were pretty degree resolute when we started, but we're about to start at a new place at women's prison. And we've got some ideas about expanding in general ways to, the whole population. So I'm just like really inspired by and convinced by what you say. I actually had a question for you. One little question is I'd love to know what some of the beautiful words were. But another question to you as a poet, I was fascinated by your remark of poetry and art as an entry into learning. So as a poet, like as you're teaching students in these facilities poetry, what did they learn? I mean, it's enough just to learn poetry, right? But what did they learn besides poetry, or what sort of entries into broader ways of thinking and maybe feeling did they get from learning poetry?
Well, I think I'm going to lump poetry and drawing together for a second here, because we've seen this pretty consistently in both of those classes. We have a lot of individuals who sign up for those classes as their entry point into our program. And it is because, they have always wanted to learn how to do something, or they've seen somebody else doing it and they want to know how to do it. And they have gotten frustrated with their own attempts at starting, and they feel like they need an expert. So one of the things that we do in our classes is especially in the community education programming, is we kind of dismantle the idea of who is the expert, and dismantle the idea of what is the perfect poem and what is the perfect drawing, instead focusing on what is it that you want to do? What is your goal? What do you want somebody else to see? And sometimes their response is, "I actually don't want anybody else to see this. This is just for me," right? And then you have a completely different dialogue with that individual about how to push writing and creativity as a mechanism for seeing the self. But the process of, in a poetry class, the process of writing poems and revising, right, is like you have to learn as a student to say this first draft is not the best thing I've ever written, and it's going to take work, and that you can't see and understand everything about a poem that you've written the first time you read it, because the brain works in really remarkable ways, right? So it's like teaching, it's our classes are about seeing and thinking and asking questions that have absolutely no answer. And our students get super tired of me doing that. I teach a student success class in our pre-college. We have a focused pre-college program for those who have gotten accepted into the degree track. And I'm always asking them big unanswerable questions on their writing assignments. And they always want more explanation and more this. They're wanting somebody to tell them what to do, because we exist and they exist in a structure of people directing everything. And what we're trying to do is help students trust themselves and to have a gut reaction to a question or to a photograph or to an essay, and to go with that, and to not get hung up on, is this what somebody wants to hear, instead of this is what I want to say.
Makes
So
sense.
confidence and process, and some really phenomenal poems and pieces of art. Incidentally, there's a woman who was in several of our classes at Tutwiler for years and years, who just did her first gallery talk. She's out now. And her first gallery talk was for the MoMA.
Not a bad start.
Not a bad start, right? But she has a couple of pieces that are part of the collection that Nicole Fleetwood put together, Marking Time. I think Nicole is coming in and speaking with y'all in your series, right? And so I would love to ask Tamika that question on your behalf and get that response. I'll work on that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And Rob, let's talk sometime about pre-college classes and community ed.
We would really love to. I would really love to have that conversation. Thank you.
That'd be great.
Guys, could you say just a few words about your teachers and where they come from and
Sure.
how many?
So because we work in facilities all over the state, we have teachers from all over the state. For the most part, most of our folks are individuals who are either working on graduate school or have earned a graduate degree. There are exceptions to that for individuals who have existed in the professional world and have the experience. Part of the reason for me trying to build that as a standard practice very early on was, even though we couldn't offer classes for credit, we very much wanted our students to know that they were doing college work and they were taking classes taught by people who work at college, teach at college. And, part of it is you are not getting a dumbed down version of education. You are getting this syllabus, which looks exactly like, except for the location, the syllabus for a class that's taught on campus. We have learned sometimes that with those syllabi, they can be a little bit intimidating. And so we've been revisiting and restructuring design-wise how a syllabus looks in terms of presenting information and making things feel more welcoming. That's a whole other, we worked on this. We spent about 6 months building a correspondence drawing curriculum. We've moved into a correspondence model right now because we're not able to do in-person classes. And building a drawing curriculum for correspondence is not a small undertaking. anyway, one of the things in our process of doing that was fundamentally understanding how white space and instructional information is perceived by students when they don't have a teacher in the classroom to guide the interaction with the thing, right? So trying to work on incorporating more play into a highly sophisticated drawing techniques, right? But taking some of the, taking some of the seriousness and intimidation factor out of it. And I, Bruce, I'd be happy to send some of our, some of the documents we've created here recently, just in terms of like a design point for thinking about presentation, if you're interested.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. I'm teaching a furniture class on Zoom this semester, so we're trying to figure out how to hammer nails by Zoom.
Wow. Wow.
Maybe if we have one last question, being respectful of everyone's time.
I saw somebody submitted a question via the chat. CJ was asking, what was the name of the women's prison that you worked at?
It's the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women. And if you have heard of the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women, you know that it is an absolutely horrid place. It's the oldest prison in the state, and it was built in the early 1940s. When I first started, maybe the second or third semester I taught there, when I first was working, they still segregated. Here we are back to that term. Their HIV and AIDS positive individuals, and nobody would go in and teach classes in their space. But we did. We liked it. Incidentally, it's that it was one of the only living quarters where we could walk outside and sit at a picnic table. It's just kind of mind-boggling.
Something that you touched. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please.
No, I already asked the question. I was going to ask if no one else has a question. I have a question because I have like 50 questions, but I want to give space.
Go ahead.
So I'm thinking about the big problem that you addressed in the beginning of your talk about the kind of dehumanization in our society for incarcerated individuals. And you mentioned that there is, I think, a nationally traveling art exhibit and that you guys publish a book. And to me, that seems like a way of kind of doing some of the work of I don't want to say showing people that other people are human, but I feel like that's kind of a little bit of it. And I'm wondering how you frame both that art exhibit and the book in a way that isn't voyeuristic, recognizes the kind of centrality and identity of these people as artists and creators. But I'm imagining it's also themed within this idea that like these are people who are incarcerated. And I'm just wondering how you strike that balance. What is the kind of context that you found to be useful, and what maybe some of the outside reaction has been?
That's a fantastic question, and that is a tough balance to strike. So when we first put together our very first anthology, and then we put together our very first art exhibit, because everybody who was teaching with the program at that point was a writer or an artist, we structured the book like you would structure any other anthology that would come out of any other program. And it's not, if I had it to do over again, I wouldn't have prison in the name of our program, because then there is a way, right, always, that it is an anchor and an association. And it is something that we've considered shifting, to take that association away, right? We are incredibly sensitive to the voyeuristic nature of most people on the outside when consuming anything having to do with the lives of people on the inside. And desperately try not to negatively participate in that. When I go back and look at myself 20 years ago and, things that, we said and did, it's embarrassing, right? And I didn't know, and there wasn't anybody else really to learn from. And the part of it of the I didn't know, right? It circles back to this conversation, the never-ending conversation about associations of worth, and why in the world should we be surprised that there are people on the inside of a prison who are artists and writers and musicians and mathematicians and programmers and all of these different things? Why? But we make a spectacle out of it instead of saying this artist at this location did this piece, right? And there is an exceptionalism because people are creating and doing under duress and the most horrific human struggle, right? But people have also always been doing that. So it's a super complicated question. I would, at this point in my career and looking at the national scene and understanding all the things that I have seen, my humble opinion at this point is that the names of all things having to do with working inside of prisons or with system impacted people should be determined by system impacted people. And the reason for that is that it is their life and their experience, and that they should be in charge of that. But I wasn't savvy or smart enough to figure that out 20 years ago. I was trying to be inclusive by making the clunkiest name for a program ever, right? It doesn't flow well. But everybody just wanted to say education. And I'm like, no, we got to keep the art in there. So that kind of answers your question. It kind of doesn't answer your question. If you will send me an email, I'll drop you one of our anthologies in the mail, and you can kind of look at how we've done design and taking on that sensitivity.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That would be amazing.
As I learned the other day that this is the sign for applause, the universal signing symbol for applause. So thank you so much. Something that you said that really struck with both Marilee and I is that you talked about how the land has memory, and we felt that the first second we stepped foot in Alabama when we moved there, and we're struck by not only the sense that history was in the dirt, but that the dirt is red, and we have never forgotten that. So
yeah,
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And you're welcome to send emails if you have more questions or something like that. I don't know if you want to send my email out to everybody that registered, or you can just Google.
Kyes, can I drop your email in the chat?
Oh yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, because I would like to, because I got I had quite a few technical difficulties, and it was a few things, at least a couple more different things I want to both contribute and ask of you. And I would like to, so if I could get the email information.
That'd be great, Kareem. I'd love to keep talking.
Thanks, Kareem.
And is it your Gmail, Kyes?
That's fine. Or the one, my Auburn University is kyes@auburn.edu.
Okay, I'll put that one.
Just leave it there. I'm wrapping up.
Just give me 1 second. Say it one more time.
It's Kyes, Kyes @auburn.edu.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So I appreciate all y'all's technical support.
Thank you. It was really amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And I hope that I really want to get in touch with Kareem. I'm sorry that he was having phone issues. I know that's super frustrating. I deal with internet issues here all the time. And
Right.
it's anyway, but I just wanted to say thank you.
Do you want me to send y'all just a email to both of y'all? But you have his number too. So.
Yeah, I sent him an email, and I'll try to call him later too.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks y'all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.